GitHub. Yeah, today we have yet another session, a very interesting session. We have been having this series of sessions, right, where we present our partner startups whom we work with closely, and obviously there's a lot to share. In fact, I have always seen that there's a myriad of use cases or solutions and case studies which typically our partner startups have, but generally in this webinar we see that we keep it limited to a topic, right? While obviously we do give an overview about what is the capability of the company who is presenting. So today again is another interesting topic, right? Keeping the supply chains alive and connected in a very unique way. I mean the genesis of this is, right, Axon as a company. I was absolutely highly impressed when we had the first conversation 2 months back, and then what happened is that is where I said that, hey, here is someone who comes with a pedigree of really having seen that whole decades of experience, right? A team who has really done, obviously cutting edge work across the globe, and in the, at leadership positions in companies like, say, Mindtree, for instance, right? Coming to today's topic, but I mean, I will always give the, I'm very excited to give the introduction about the team who is going to present today. But coming to the topic today, it is iGrid, running a supply chain network that's alive and connected, right? I mean, primarily this is about bringing the intelligence at the point of sale to the furthest end of supply chain procurement, by enabling secure ask-tell interactions in what the iGrid can enable. Now, and the interactions is something which always caught my mind, right? When I continue to have discussions with the Axon team, is where I think, they have a very unique proposition around this whole genesis of the company. What I mean by that, I'm sure, today's speaker, Koushik Ramani, who is the CEO, would anyway elaborate on how this whole, axons, which are the connecting dots in our neurons, and their interactions. And he would give more insights around how they are trying to really have this whole unique way of computing, I would say, right, going forward. Today, everyone is trying to understand what Web 3.0 has in the offering for all of us, right? Whether it is around forming communities and connecting them, demand, supply side of it, or whether it is to do with, the buzzwords like NFT and blockchains and stuff like that. But however, how uniquely someone is trying to understand all these, right, based on the past experience, is what is going to really bring forth a lot of interesting session today. Now, just to speak about Koushik, over 2 decades of technology experience across industries and geos, businesses and technology enabler, bringing digital alive for organizations across the globe. Before, starting off Axon, he was with Mindtree, where, he, in the digital transformation space, had been evangelizing an industry-wide shift and has helped, leadership positions and leaders in that space to really enable whatever are the hype for the buzz when we have seen over the past decade or so on the digital transformation side. I mean, as a head of business there, he was engaged in, with India incorporated companies at CEO and CXO, CMD levels. And I mean, I can talk a lot, but he's actively involved in solution shaping, right? Program orchestration and delivery assurance, and manage stakeholders across business and technology. And this really brings in, he and Tony from his team is also joined us. See, they bring in an experience where they're actually, involved in various communities and industry groups that are business focused or technical, and has a good understanding of digital, AI, automation, RPA, infrastructure, transformation, and optimization services. So, I mean, obviously, what I liked about him is that, he's so forthcoming in terms of he looks so fulfilled when he's helping people to grow professionally. I mean, that I think will surely bind his, team and his vision and realize, various future relationships which he would like to nurture to long-term solutions and success, right? So I mean, not take much time. I think, Koushik and Tony, the floor is yours. Please, take over.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Uday. And thank you all. Thank you, Incubate Hub first, for giving us this opportunity to present what we do at Axon. Before we get started, anyway, thanks for Uday giving such a wonderful introduction. I'll quickly take 2 minutes and talking about two of my core team members who are here. One is Anthony Alapat. He's also there on chat. You can start putting in your questions, anything specific, anything on technical or technology related. Anthony will be the person to go-to person. I'll also try and answer, having come from that particular background. And we have Papita, who is actually responsible for branding, positioning, messaging, and trying to take it to the market. And like every other company, we strongly believe in collaboration. So Axon, as such, is not going to be independently going to go to market. We clearly know what we add value to an enterprise. We clearly know how we can enable service providers, or service integrators, if you will. And then we also understand how to do the supply side for the technology, which is the academicians or the academia. And Papita will be the go-to person who will clearly help you with how to onboard these two things. So we have three of us on call. Tony, Anthony, also known as Tony. So Tony, Papita, and I are here. And pretty much we'll get going with what we have on store for us, right? So as Uday was mentioning, can Axon solve only the supply chain related issues? And if so, how are we doing? What are we doing and how are we doing it uniquely? And what are the things that we are going to solve? I think first positioning that I want to leave you with is Axon is a horizontal solution. So we are not domain specialists, right? We are not. So I presume that some of you who are on the call are from the supply chain, functions yourselves. So you know your function better. But what we are trying to solve is trying to bring that solution to these domains. So supply chain is one critical use case that we think we have to solve, and we have taken that. But otherwise, for all practical purposes, whether it is supply chain or a digital factory or a manufacturing setup or any function that needs interactions, Axon can solve those pieces of the puzzle, right? With that said, the context of this discussion, we are trying to keep it around supply chain, and that's the first use case that we have also been fairly successful in getting some of these things up and running. It is a patented product, so the Axon core algorithm is patented. The core, crux of this whole solution set is patented, and we are happy to say that the patent has also been granted. It's over a decade of research that we have been doing in parallel to our day job, and that's how we have resulted in what we are talking about. The second key takeaway from this is a byproduct of how Axon is being consumed in the enterprises is the iGrid. Like Uday was mentioning, it's about that information grid, and we'll talk more about it. Particularly on the supply chain itself, if you really look at today's supply chain challenges, and I'm taking into account the COVID-induced disruptions, pre-COVID as well, some of these did existed, but post-COVID, I think, or not post-COVID, while in COVID, the last 2.5 years, the disruptions have been massive. And some of these numbers that you see here are very, very, slap on the face per se, right? For instance, 94% of the Fortune 1000 that we are talking about have had deep disruptions, right? And this is not just about positive or negative impact, but they have created a significant impact on their supply chain systems. Of the 94, we have been given to understand that about 75% of them have had negative or strong negative impacts on their business because of lack of visibility or lack of having a good grip and control on the supply chain. And of that, if you really look back, 55% of those are likely to go back and downgrade their growth outlooks, right? And probably this is the summation of what's happening in the global market. And this is why probably we are seeing in the news about, recession striking. It is not, the storm is not yet over. We are still in the eye of the storm. It's still a lot more to come, and so on and so forth. But the good news is, I think this is also an opportunity for kind of segregating the wheat and the chaff, right? So companies that are focusing on actually addressing the bottom line value will continue to treat this like a growth phase and probably a very fast growth compared to otherwise. And that's where I think Axon is neatly positioned as well, because we want to hit the nail. And that is one of the reasons, even though while I said Axon is a horizontal solution set, we are consciously taking supply chain as one critical use case and going deeper into that particular phase. Then we looked at, hold on first. Hold on, I think once, almost, okay. I was just, there was a slight change in the flow of slides. Now looking at the supply chain conundrum itself, right? While some of these are being addressed by other companies, people are talking about intelligent routing, logistics management, 3PL, and so on and so forth. In essence, it is actually solving each of the problems within these boxes, whether it's a supplier or a producer or a distributor or a retailer. And the interaction between them has been predominantly driven by, more or less preset patterns, which is also kind of creating that lack of visibility, stating what is actually happening in, and is there likely to be a delay, and will that have an impact on my own productions and my own commitments. The impact of supply chain, particularly the way we see it, happening is because of an internal control with each of these functions, and the impact of that on the end customer, from almost like what Uday was mentioning earlier, from a point of sale system in a retail segment all the way to the producer's side. Can we have more intelligence? It's not just about data, but can we have more, not a simple handshake that we do today, which is what I'm saying is done both at the upstream and downstream. And these are prefixed interfaces, so you exactly know what are the 10 questions that your supplier is going to ask, and you have those answers, or the suppliers know what you are asking and they have their answers for. But actual problems or challenges that continues to exist in reality is about the poor visibility, right? I mean, in terms of not just where it is and what is happening to my piece of the puzzle that I'm searching for, or beyond that, it's also about what is the impact of that on my commitments to my customers. That's what we mean by poor visibility across the supply chain. The second thing is market dynamics have been changing. What has happened because of the lockdowns and restricted movements and restricted operations and things, are all the systems capable enough to be adaptive and be resilient to the global impacts or global causes? I don't think that's the case yet. For what has happened to you and me as people, I think we have taken, right? I mean, thanks that we are all in the software industry, at least some of us are in the software industry, that we can work from home, work in the office, work from a coffee shop. So we have kind of adopted how do we set things as an office space and so on and so forth. But when we talk about a human being, our natural resilience is allowing us to survive, and that is what is allowing us to survive and scale. Can the systems and functions do the same thing? Can the technology that we are consuming today do the same thing? And most often than not, the answer is a straight no, because you have defined the problem statement. You have fixed what the problem statement is meant to be and what is the dimension from which you're addressing that problem statement. And then you're addressing an answer for it. So what is the new dimension that you're looking at it is not addressed by the solution that you've provided. And that results in either an overstocking or an out of stock situation, or lack of visibility in the working capital, or from a transparency or an agility or a velocity perspective, not having a clear view on many things. This does not mean the world or the earth is coming to an end. We also spoke to a couple of these advisors, and one thing that struck our eye was from what Gartner was talking about. And here, for the supply chain conundrum, the critical piece of the puzzle that's likely to solve this will continue to be a technology initiative. So technology will continue to remain as a strategic imperative, and anyone who wants to actually survive this storm, I'm not talking from a service provider perspective, I'm talking from an enterprise perspective, they have to clearly emerge and mature for their own competitive advantage by consuming the right technology. And some of these numbers that you see once again are very glaring, and I'd like to bring your attention to 2-3 critical elements. One, look at it from a warehouse operations standpoint. They're saying by 26, in the next 4 years, almost 75% of these enterprises, large enterprises, will be using intra-logistic smart robots. We are not talking just about AGVs and things, but it will be more determined by how can I have free access to my supplier's kitchen as well and see how I make things move across borders. The second element is about the commercial supply chain vendors, the software vendors. They are only talking about embedded advanced analytics or artificial intelligence, as the case may be, all powered by data science. So once again, it is setting the context. Yes, it's a great initiative. Yes, technology does solve it. AI and embedded and advanced analytics are all critical, but it is all set on that predetermined interface for the various asks at each layer of this communication chain they will be asking for, right? And the next critical point that I just wanted to draw your attention to is about the 25% of the supply chain execution will be rewritten to modern architectures. And that's the opportunity that we are trying to say, that you don't have to once again adopt to something that's been there. That's something that you'll have to consume, and probably in the next 5 years, get back to the same stage and say another 25% needs a rewrite or adoption. And look at the composability factor. 25% will rewrite and be ready to adopt or adapt the changes that they need to have in place, but only 5% of them will have the true composability. And I think that 5% expanding is what we are trying to solve from Axon, stating when you consume Axon as a base, it provides that natural adaptability, and we will talk more about it as we go further. Overall, I think there will be significant value loss if they have to merge the digital supply chain twin and the control tower initiatives that the supply chain functions are looking at today, if they don't put the right technology in place. And that's the piece that we are trying to solve in this whole thing. Now, how can you solve all of these things? The answer to all this conundrum is how can we create a critical link that keeps the world connected? And when we talk about critical link, obviously two key things in mind are about privacy and security. And we are very clearly mindful of the fact that it is not intruding and stepping into somebody else's shoe, but still maintaining the transparency across these functions and entities and allowing us to move back and forth for collecting the data. With that said, instead of seeing the supply chain as a simple chain, can we see it as a network, right? What's the difference? What's a big difference between chain and network? We will talk about that in a second, but at a high level, a chain is sequential. In a network, it could be more of a mesh. And unless you start seeing things as a network, unless you start seeing things in the network as interactions, being able to understand and solve that problem may be a challenge, right? And from our perspective, we are saying the moment you reimagine your supply chain as a digital supply network, and then start seeing the communication as interactions, then you start defining a new model of a supply chain that enables autonomous operations and control for each of the partners that are there in the system. Also allow them to handshake freely with each other. That's where in the topic that we spoke about, we said we will be talking about iGrid. I'm just connecting the problem and the solution. We'll talk deeper about the solution, and we also have a subsequent slide that talks about this in a real life scenario. But broadly, our take on this is, instead of seeing this as a chain, redefine that model as a network, give the autonomous capability and control for each of those participants in it so they decide how they operate. But the handshake becomes pretty much a peer-to-peer networking. That allows us to easily scale because everybody becomes a node in the network. And hence, the scale of this supply chain can be pretty much dynamic, and across the world, we can get that connected. That also results in the agility. And while we have this agility, because it's a digital network, we can leave behind the breadcrumbs, increasing the traceability and trace back our source from where we started. All of this being enabled by a digital core, right? That is where we have a critical role to play. Axon. Once again, just a quick trace back to what we were talking all along. I said Axon is a horizontal. We could solve any problem. We have consciously choosing to solve the supply chain problem and the digital factory to begin with. We are interested in partnering with enterprises, with service integrators, and with academia to try and see how using this base platform, using this base tenet that we are bringing to the market. If we can all collectively solve various other problems, that's where the real utilization of Axon would be. The two things that Uday spoke about, he talked about Axon, the positioning, the way in which we are connecting. We'll talk a little bit about why did we choose that name, what is the significance behind Axon. We'll also talk about a little bit on Web 3.0, lot of definitions, people consume it and understand it in the way they would like to. We also would like to do that, but set the context to you stating how we see this whole thing. Axon as the word, this is not taken from anywhere else. It's all from our human body, from the brain. And essentially, when you talk about two neurons communicating, there is a long piece of thread-like thing, which is much thinner than a human hair, that's actually connecting these neurons and communicating this signal. That's a core axon. All it communicates is electrical impulses, and that's how neurons communicate with each other. The reason why we pick this up is, if you have to treat the supply chain as a network, we have to now understand that each of the neuron has got its own function, action to perform, its own body, its own dendrite, and the terminal that it needs to work on, and on the core that it's focusing on. But being able to have that simple piece of connection that will just pass on requisite data to whoever seeks or whoever passes it to him to be processed and sent back, right? So it could be a simple ask and tell. And that's where we are picking up. We are basically behaving as the nerve fiber that passes these electrical impulses, resulting in action potentials, right? So which means none of what we are talking about, none of what we are anticipating is pre-coded. It is completely adaptable. It almost mimics the way in which our human brains work. For instance, this presentation, this conversation, I'm sure many of you have quite a few questions that you may have. And I don't have an FAQ of sorts that I would refer back, and as you type your question, quickly search on this and give you an answer. It's mostly interactions, right? You're going to ask a question. I have a perspective to it, maybe right, maybe not right. Then Tony may add some perspective, Papita may add some perspective. But overall, what we're trying to say is it's all driven by an ask or a tell, and that's the way the whole communication is. And this function of how our brain neuron communicates is exactly what we are trying to mimic in our Axon system. We'll talk about the tech side of how we have adapted it in a second. And the synapse way of communication is what we are primarily talking about. The second fundamental difference that we are bringing to the market is about all what we have been doing from the time we started doing a computing. I'm not complaining, but even as an individual, from my own career perspective, I've always been on the lambda calculus, which is how the core of the entire computing world has been, right? From what you use as an Intel or an AMD architecture, we have always been on the lambda calculus, where everything is a functional computation. Everything is seen as a function and a functional application. So it's all confined to a piece, and then it gives certain set outcomes and interface with APIs and so on and so forth. Versus a pi calculus is actually treating everything based on message-based concurrency, and which essentially sees everything as a process. Then the computation is preceded by communication on channels and not as preset functions that gives outcome based on consumption of a function. So once again, to recall, we're talking about that synapse. We are talking about that electrical pulses that resulting in action potentials, that resulting in a pi calculus based approach. Ideally speaking, guys, we should have been a hardware, like an Intel or an AMD, a processor that provides this capability. Obviously, as a young startup, we don't have the deep pocket. So we are trying to mimic all of that things on a software base today. So we still consume lambda calculus at the back end. But as we grow, as we solve, and as this becomes mainstream, I'm sure at some point in time in future, we will move this into a hardware-based solution where we are able to adopt pi calculus as a complete full mode of processing things. And then the last piece of the puzzle, which is the Web 3 and Web 3.2. So the mimicking of the brain, consumption of lambda versus pi calculus, and what do we mean by Web 3.0 or Web 3, right? Most often than not, people kind of use this as synonyms. We don't want to use it as synonym. We are a very clear Web 3.0. So there is a distribution model of client and server. That's where the ask and tell works. the underlying protocols being HTTP and HTTPS, and that's exactly what you will see in this. That's why when you create networks of solutions in Axon, it's as simple as a secured HTTP communication, and that's where security and privacy is by design and not as an afterthought. It continues to leverage the World Wide Web, obviously as an evolution of the web per se. It's progressive in nature. We are not looking at an alternative to blockchain, or we're not looking at an alternative to World Wide Web in its current form. Can it manifest into that in the subsequent future? Can we be focusing on a DeFi kind of environment? Possibly, yes, because as I said, this is a horizontal to play. In the context of the supply chain, keeping that running and alive, we want to set these pieces of the puzzle. So the rest of the slides that you see, what we are focusing on and what we are offering, the idea is to primarily look at it from these three contexts, from what goes on. And that said, what we have done is we have done two key pieces of Axon. There are no algorithms in it. It's a complete language defined by us, and we have also defined the processors. So imagine a black box that's almost mimicking the human brains and the way in which we interact. That's how every communication, every interaction in Axon happens. It's all based on nodes, and fairly simple for you to adopt, because today, as we speak, we have made it available on all cloud providers. It can also be made available on your enterprise premises. All we just need to do is bring our base piece of the processor and start executing. So that's one piece of the puzzle. And the communication itself is enabled on the Axon language. Again, not a very difficult programming language. In the today's world of low code, no code, this is as good as businesses writing programs in the business language. For instance, if you have to tag a particular container moving from point A to point B, and you have to take 3 or 4 decisions, you write your language in the same way. Container A moving to point B, doing this. That's the kind of flexibility we have set in. So the language is not, the syntax is not something very, very IT and programmatic. The syntax is very, very business. So we have tried to marry the semantics and the syntax to provide a very flexible language that you can consume. And how are we now using that to serve you on the enterprise per se? Obviously, we support the entire information, computation, and interaction layer. We play across the spectrum on the Web 3.0 by creating a zero trust enterprise information system. Right. That is why we are straight away having security and privacy by default and not as an afterthought. That actually enables us in creating an information grid. For all practical purposes, treat this like your power plugs, right? I mean, you have a USB charger today. All device manufacturers are saying you have a USB-C, or you have a 210, 110, 220 volts, whatever is the plug that you need to connect to. Imagine if businesses are able to connect to various systems very similar to that information grid. That's what we are able to create, because it is not just a data warehouse and where you're doing your ETL and other data massaging and slicing and dicing. It's pretty much information slices in the web, and it's all pure ask and tell model that we are working with. And that is enabled by our intelligent synaptic network. We can answer that eventually. That result of this information grid is what you see. So information can be consumed as a utility. So you can literally use an Alexa or a Google and ask for voice inputs, and the system can respond to you with a voice-based answer. Leverage any technology that you're consuming today, whether it's a smartphone, tablet devices, whatever they are, you could leverage those. We also provide a Hypermedia API, providing you that flexibility to not be driven by the complete API alone, but accessing the data the way in which you would like to access it. So there is a security wrapper. Most of these information and ask and tell are already available as the network processor internally at the core. And there is a caching farm that kind of manages this entire navigation. And that is what, is the real solution that we see as the problem to the supply chain conundrums. How do we actually now put that in place? This is how we visualize a supply network, a digital supply network. Instead of seeing them as verticals, where a supplier, a producer, or a distributor, or retailer, consumer comes in, it's a mesh network communicating on an Axon core, and it is 360-degree communication, right? They are communicating not just with one direction or with preset, asks and tell or preset interfaces. It's completely bidirectional touch points all through signals. It's completely smart and dynamic because you can keep adding any number of people to this network and remove people as you need. And it's all executed through the Axon language that just identifies these based on a fundamental workflow, right? Which is basically talking about what is the path in which it should take, what are the cause and the effect, how does the whole thing works on. And for that, as a quick example, this was supposed to be an animated slide, but in the interest of time, we have kind of kept it, removed all the animation. If you're looking at a 9-step process for a simple supply chain in action, programs can be as simple as this. And what you see on the right-hand side as the 9-step itself is the code that you write in the Axon language. Not exactly in an English line like this, but almost like an XML structure that will allow you to create this base structure and run that piece, right? So you can do a purchase order accept channel, then you start, inform the producer, simultaneously inform the shipment batch and so on and so forth. The network is, because it's dynamically connected, it passes on all the key information to all the key people on the ask and tell, and it can also be pre-coded to tell how the tell is pre-consumed or pre-initiated, so that all the people who needs to be informed gets notified and their asks or their path of action can start in parallel. That's how a product workflow pathway has been defined. That results in tracking the inventory in real time. So just in conclusion, I'm sorry, I know I just went in like a complete train. We will be absolutely happy to take any questions that you may have. But in overall essence, a new way of looking at solving the problems, completely mimicking the human brains, working predominantly on interactions driven by ask and tell. And that's where we are talking about today. So I'll stop sharing. We will open it up for any questions that you may have. You can also type in your questions on chat.
Hi, Koushik, Muthu here. Sorry, shall I go now or?
Please go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Please. Yeah, thank you. See, one question I have is, it looks a little abstracted in terms of, applying it across various this thing. So can you walk us through in terms of one use case, how it is plugged in? Because, what I see is that, it is not a conventional API and all these models, right? So I'm trying to visualize in terms of how the coupling happens on a use case. For example, you are talking about a supply chain where, in a mesh environment, not even a network, right? So right. If it is in a mesh, right, not even a star, right? So when you have such mesh network, so I'm trying to visualize how this will get coupled with my various. Are you saying that I already have an existing system and it will mesh with this for the endpoint delivery, or is it the system itself will be using this and then delivering it? So I'm just trying to get that clarity there.
Sure, Muthu. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Tony to answer that. But look back at the screen that I'm sharing right now, and probably you can use this as an example to tell you how it interfaces with the existing system. Tony?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, Muthu. Good question. So let's look at just the traceability, right? If you look at that number 3, correct?
Number 3 shipment.
Number 3,
right? Okay.
Yeah. Right after number 3, there's a product traceability, right?
Right.
So now what happens is the producer has the data. Imagine you have multiple providers on the network, right? Producer is one entity, and this supply network is another entity. Distributor another entity, and they are all connected by URLs. So imagine producer provides a URL that travels on that shipment channel, and this one can. So now this pathway will open up that product traceability channel, which will actually point to a URL back to the producer, right? So imagine the whole thing is as a link of a bunch of links. Basically, technically it's called nodes, right? So it's a bunch of URLs.
Okay.
So these are all connected as URLs. So the network will actually take you to the right information. Does that make sense? Or
Is there a way by which we can quickly show them how that URLs interact?
Is it something which any demo available where I can see?
Yeah, what we can do is we can walk you through. Today I haven't set up. We can go through set up a demo for you. Yeah. Can we have a follow-on call? Would that help, Muthu?
Yeah, I think that we can do.
Yeah, I can walk you through. We can do a demo for you. So that will make it more convenient.
Yeah, because I'm trying to visualize.
Yeah, I understand.
So that, I get my because something something I feel as if I have understood. Somewhere I see I have not understood. So in a very kind of a flux state I am in now.
Yeah, because it's slightly different. It's a different point of view. Yeah.
That is precisely why I want to get myself very clear.
Correct. So best is if you can set up a follow-on demo. We have set up a demo server. We can walk you through an existing code and how the interactions happen. So that will be, that will be the best way. Demo is the best.
Yeah. Okay, fine.
You have some, we know how to reach out to you or?
Yes, Koushik will reach out, don't worry.
Okay.
We will do that setup. One interesting piece in this whole thing before somebody else has some questions. This is also about understanding and learning and unlearning some of the past. What we have traditionally set in the past is we know an algorithm construct, we know what are the instantiation of variables, we know the semantics, and then we say we will have to have an array, we'll have to have a database, you do this process and so on and so forth. From that, we are completely changing it into this model of interactions. So there needs to be a little bit of unlearning. And like Tony said, we will come back to you with a separate one-on-one that we'll go deeper into. Yes, so that's a question that's on the chat poll, I guess. Okay, Uday.
So basically,
drop a note to, I'm so sorry, Tony. You can also drop a note to Uday. He has mentioned his email on chat. Take, as soon as you drop an email, he can also connect you to us.
Yes.
So that will be ideal. If you can get on a call, that will be really good. Yeah, so we can. And I encourage everybody to, please give us an opportunity to talk to you. So,
Thanks.
I think it will be.
Koushik.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
I think you're really
you
really bored everybody.
I know. That's what I'm saying. Either it's been really hacksawn or
you have confused everybody.
Confused all the
Wonderful job, Koushik.
So yeah, I personally feel that yes, Koushik, really thanks.
It's a good job.
Setting the context is what was today's agenda, to see that people get that interest of how they would like to set their use cases to be able to get enabled through this. And that's what is the main intention. And I would love that, I think the poll is the poll over. I think would love if people can, complete the poll with a simple yes or no. And then I think, we would be able to connect up with, Koushik, Tony and team, the Action team.
I think it'll be a demo will be the best way to to visualize it.
Correct. I obviously a follow-on deep dive is where I think people will be able to realize to how the applicability of it is there for their specific use case.
Exactly.
So great. I think anything. Tony, if you like to say something about
technology, you have your own language, so we serve up the server, and it is your own language. It's all your own IP, so the business is completely yours. We have nothing to do with it. We are just like the Oracle database. So once we give you the code, it's all left to you. Be creative and make it happen.
I see. I think that's again another thing I am seeing these days. I am really seeing that quite a few are really interested. Hey, I am ready with my at least design in my mind. Someone is already gone ahead and said I have done my design both in terms of what the hardware specs are, the software specs,
Correct,
and all
correct.
that here. I need someone who can really now enable this, right? And
Correct.
get it done at scale.
Correct.
So I think,
and we want,
you're
and we want people to be on their own. We don't want to handhold and and our interfaces are completely open. They are all standard HTTP URLs, so you can connect anything to it. We don't hold anything. And since they're all HTTP URLs, your standard firewalls, your standard security protocols will work. So you plop this in your network, and you're secure. You're behind the firewall with your existing LDAP and security. So
got that. I think that's the unique way of enabling and empowering the teams to be able to be creative and address their own issues, and obviously
correct. With minimum disturbance, disruption.
A quick question.
Hi.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Naveen. So I have a question to Tony. Maybe Koushik also knows this. So you mentioned this is the language is DSL, like a domain-specific language that you had used for configuring the supply chain.
Yes, sir. Correct.
So, is it based on an existing language, or is it like something that you have created from scratch?
See, all programming languages are based on lambda calculus. Okay, and this is the only language that's based on PyCalculus. So this language is not based on any of the existing languages. Imagine a language with no exceptions.
Got it.
So this is totally different. So you will not have the system would be more secure because you don't have exceptions or less errors. So people you will not need data structures. There is a lot of advantages. You can have causation. So this follows that, right? Which you can't do in existing languages. So it's a totally different language. So which will
we have created it.
Thank you. Yeah. Sure. Okay. And maybe one more question, which maybe it is relevant at a later stage, but maybe I'll just shoot it. We've been hearing a lot of supply chain abstraction these days. So are there any standards that define the interactions between entities in a supply chain? Like, is your platform based on any such reference standard, or is it fluid right now?
No, ours is just like a programming language. So imagine SQL, right? This is just like a programming language. Now the standards is what interactions you have between you and your supplier. So you can define that standard yourself. So we are not taking existing standard and running it. We are taking something from fundamental theoretical computer science.
Understood. So I'm visualizing this more like a BPL, like BPEL, like business.
Yeah, much more BPL, similar, but much more advanced. But there will be fundamental differences, which we can walk through. I would suggest sign up for a demo. If we can walk you through it. Then it'll grab you immediately.
Sure. Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate Naveen for putting in.
Naveen went in. Uday, one quick question. Will we be making this presentation available for them to download from somewhere?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. On the Incubate Hub platform, on your page itself, this will be available on demand as well as anytime. People can go through. Yeah.
Perfect.
In fact, we will also be sharing with people who have come here today, as well as people who showed interest, but for whatever reason they were not here. We will be sharing with them as well. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Great. I think awesome. If anyone has any last question or anything, you could unmute or post it on the chat, and I'm sure.
Yeah, please ask. So I'm glad to answer.
But let me ask. Okay, not a question though, but typically, how do you recommend in terms of what should be the engagement, methodology, or I would say model for anyone, right? Any business function has any, say, a use case or something. How do you recommend them to really, engage with you, right? Right from, I mean, typically, as you know, Incubate Hub typically runs in terms of, ensuring that the use case is defined for you to understand, right? Primarily. So, and then take it along in terms of, what is the appeal, strategic intent behind the use case, and then develop it, right? And
that's a Koushik
see
kind of
that this is
question.
primarily. So yeah, so
I would leave it to
primarily how
Koushik.
to be, yeah.
Thanks for asking that question, Uday. I think first and foremost, we took supply chain as a use case. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a horizontal solution. We could go pick up any problem, and as long as we are able to understand the problem statement, convert it into a network model, right? And say what sort of an interaction will it result into, and what sort of an interaction it needs to manage. That's the only exercise that we need to do. So essentially, learning the Axon language is just about an 8-week exercise, just to get the look and feel of the system, as well as how do I write, like for the question that Naveen asked, very straightforward business language is what you use to write that language. So as long as we know each of those business domains, the specialist sitting along with even a fresher for that matter, specifying the business language, we are ready to go. So 8 weeks is the base investment time that you need if you want to do it by yourself. We just give you the infrastructure and you start playing with it. The second part of it is, that's where we said we can work with an enterprise solving their problem directly. We could also work with service integrators who in turn are solving an enterprise's problem. So we can enable them. This is almost like how you have a Java, React.js, Node.js, and so on and so forth. You create an Axon tech capability as well, and then use or consume Axon to solve your customer's problem. Then the third side is the academia that we spoke about, where we will help you with the supply side so that you don't have to worry about bringing people, spend that 8 weeks time. You will have ready-made capability from the market whenever all the academic relationships that we are pursuing as we speak should be giving the capability right off the cuff. And that's how the whole model comes in. As we said, we picked up supply chain because we thought that's one area which is a big problem as we speak today. And that area is a lot of interactions. And the only reason why things are going haywire is because there is a lot of interactions. And it's dependent on one another. You don't get the right data point at the right time, and you're missing out on interpreting what has come to you in a way in which you understand. And I say you, I'm talking about all the systems that are communicating in this space. And that's a classic case that we could look into. So any problem statement, any engagement model, look at the problem, convert the problem into a network solution based on interactions, and then Axon can be just plugged in to solve the whole thing.
So step in, if you have a typical SDLC, what you would normally do is you would do a use case design first, and then you would convert that to a high level design, then a low level design, and then code. Imagine one where you can code directly from the use case, because there's no database design, there is not any of those. So that is what we do. So if you have a use case, you can directly code from the use case steps.
Got it. So how do you see a future, like when this whole adoption really grows, how you and your team really sees this in terms of, whether those embedded AIs and others, or any other, I would say developments which would happen, as you rightly said, hey, this could be converted into some of the use cases, it could be converted into an appliance, right? But what is your thing, Tony, especially? And
yeah, from a technology perspective, like what Koushik said, we have now layered it on a sequential machine. It's actually a concurrent machine. We have layered it on a sequential machine because of the lack of resources. And once we get revenue, then I can go to AMD and say, see, you see this, and they will build it in hardware. So till that time, we can't do anything. But I have already had a discussion with Dell and few other appliance providers. They are willing to work as long as there is a market. So if we find that once the demand side is done, we will have appliance out in the market. it will be pushed through standard, IBM and Dell channels. Maybe it'll have Axon there. Axon with IBM, I don't know. We'll see.
Correct. I think, yeah. I mean, I personally see that is something which they love to really. In fact,
Correct.
That's what we ran a program. So I recall
Right.
that they are okay to, in fact, get it branded on your name, but obviously there's a huge engineering and other support which will also come in from the back end, and that becomes very formidable, I would say, solution approach at times for some of the very prominent use cases is what we have gathered in intelligence last time when we actually had almost a year when we ran this. So I think, yeah, you're right. I think
and
I also see that
for the audience, basically this is a containerized application. So the whole thing is running as a container. So we can run it on anything. We can have on a cluster. It doesn't matter. So from a scalability perspective, we can run it as a cluster. So just an FYI.
Thanks. I think, what we would do is any which ways, whatever interest, I'm sure the poll got over by now.
Yeah.
So whatever interests flow in, I think we will anyway see how we start one-on-one deep dive interactions. And really appreciate Tony and Koushik. Koushik, you have any last word, and then we can end. Thanks.
I think once again, like Tony offered, we have where you can actually wet your hands. The labs is all the labs are on the cloud. We can also have it on your premise if you want it. We can pick up specific use cases, help you solve those, at least theoretically working with you, and then you wet your hands and do this. Happy to partner and make sure we all contribute to the next 100 years of history. What we are doing today is all on the past 100 years. Here is an opportunity to contribute to the next 100.
Super.
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds like a plan, a big plan, Okay, so really appreciate Tony and Koushik for having come over today, and in fact, all of you others, who took time out, and we are happy to be of any assistance here. Please reach out to me at uday@incubatehub.com, or I think Naveen has also given his email ID.
Correct.
We will reach out to you.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll reach out to you, Naveen.
Yeah, and obviously, I think Tony and Koushik, if you could share your email also here, it would be good in terms of how people may want to.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it is rkoushik@axon.network.
There you go.
So I got it.
Yeah. Perfect.
So please reach out to us, and we'll be glad to help you.
Sounds good.
Thank you. I think
Thank you.
Great. I think it was a nice session today and very interesting.
Correct.
Obviously, I think this should lead to a lot of curiosity. I am sure, and see that we are able to take this further. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.